Hi everyone, so my name's Rhian and I'm here today to talk to you about presenting yourself online. So making the very best impression you possibly can in online spaces, whether that's via Zoom, on email, via Outlook, or by using Microsoft Teams as well. So hopefully you'll leave here today feeling as though you're comfortable and confident in using those online spaces. But this talk is all part of the Digital Futures Festival, which is being organised by Employability Bridgend. And I really encourage you, if you live in the Bridgend borough, to actually register with Employability Bridgend, because they've got so many opportunities, so much advice and support on your journey to finding a future career. So definitely check that out. So I want to start today by looking at this quote here. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. And this is so true, whereby the first impression you make is going to really stay with someone and going to be really important, whether that's a job interview or whether that's you starting a new course in your employability journey. First impressions really count. So hopefully today I'm going to share some top tips with you which you can take away to make a brilliant first impression in an online space. And it can be trickier in an online space when you don't have that face-to-face contact you would in an in-person meeting. But hopefully I'll be able to arm you with those tips so that you can give it the best possible go. So before we dive in then, the first thing we're going to look at is email best practice. So when you're using Outlook, when you're sending emails, how can you make the best possible impression via that written format? Then we're going to look at preparing for online meetings. Believe it or not, there's so much that you can do to prepare before an online meeting to give yourself the best possible chance. And then we'll talk a little bit about getting the most out of Zoom and Teams. So these are the biggest online platforms for hosting meetings. So I'll show you a couple of the features of those and how to get the very most out of them. First up then is email. So the first point I have here is about using a professional email address. Now, we've all been there where a few years ago we might have set up a funny email address for ourselves using our nickname, which our friends call us. But when you're going to be interacting, with course leaders or with employers potentially, you want to make sure that that email address is coming across professionally. So definitely look to update it if you think it does look a little outdated or a little childish by now, and potentially just using your name, throwing in a few numbers there that are significant to you. But yeah, definitely make sure you're using a professional email address to make that best possible first impression, because don't forget, your email address is the first thing that's going to pop up in someone's inbox. The second thing here is to use polite, appropriate greetings. Now, what I mean by this is obviously when you text your friends, you might say, "Hi, mate," or "All right, what's up?" But just bearing in mind that when we're talking to an employer, a course leader, whoever it might be in a professional setting, that they might not want to be met with that same tone. They might expect something more general. So, good morning, good afternoon. Or if it's a really formal setting, it could be "Dear Mr. XYZ, dear Mrs. Da, da, da. So always think about the way that you're greeting people and how that's going to come across. And the same with your sign-offs as well on your emails. So, a thank you always goes a very long way, is always a very polite way to sign off. If it's a more formal setting, perhaps kind regards, warm regards could work. Or, if you're going to be seeing someone tomorrow, you could sign off saying, see you in class tomorrow. But always just think about the way that you're signing off your emails, because it's not going to be the same as you would sign off to your friends or to your family. The third tip here is to use a clear and concise subject line. So the subject line, obviously, again, is one of the first things someone will see when your email lands in their inbox. And it's really important not to waste their time and that they know exactly why you're emailing them. So, for example, if you're sending across your CV to them because you've seen a job advert which they're advertising, you might pop in the subject line your name, and you might pop interest in, and then the name of the job. So always keep it clear and concise as to exactly what you want. Or if you have a question for them, perhaps about a role that they're advertising, literally put that in the subject line. So say question about XYZ role. So yeah, keep it clear and concise. The fourth point here is to proofread your grammar and spelling. So there are loads and loads of free online resources these days, like spell check, and quite often actually if you're emailing from your phone or from your laptop, actually Outlook will do some proofing for you. So if you see that red squiggly line underneath something, chances are there's a grammatical error or a spelling error there. So just make sure you're going back through and reading that thoroughly. The next thing I would say is to use a professional font. Now, obviously, if you're sending someone an email, you really want to make sure that they're able to read it, right? So if you're using a font which is super, super small or super, super squiggly, and it might not be legible, you know, if someone's busy, they're not going to have time to sit and kind of decipher it. So you want to make your email as easy as possible to read. A good go-to for a font would be Arial, I would say. It's quite, you know, it's quite rounded, it's quite clear to read, but definitely do bear that in mind, and the size of the font as well. If you're sending it over in sort of size 4, then chances are someone's going to really have to zoom in and squint to read it. So definitely worth upping that font size as well to make it as clear as possible. Next tip, remember to attach documents. So I have done this a million times over, whereby maybe I've presented some work to my course leader and I've said, please see attached my first draft of this essay for you to have a look at. And I've sent email and then they've come back and said, oh, it doesn't seem to have attached anything. So this is a really common mistake to make. In fact, so much so that Outlook these days will actually, if they pick up the word attached in your email, will come with a kind of pop-up before you send the email to say, have you forgotten to attach something if you haven't added an attachment. So that's a really handy tool. But just always remember to check you have actually attached it. And you've attached the right document as well, because you could be working on kind of multiple versions of something. You know, if you've attached an old version by accident, that might not look brilliant. So just make sure that you're attaching the right thing. Next up is to avoid using all caps. So if someone types in full capital letters, as I'm sure you would read it as well, it can sound like someone's kind of shouting at you. So always make sure you're using correct kind of punctuality with this, so that you're using, you know, your big letters for the start of a sentence, but not throughout the sentence, because it might come across that you're shouting at someone. Even in your subject line, you know, the subject line doesn't need to be all caps. There seems to be this idea that subject lines ought to be in caps. Not at all, just use standard text in the subject, because again, if something lands in someone's inbox in caps, it might come across that you're shouting or being quite demanding, and something may well be urgent, but it doesn't need capital letters to convey that. The next tip here then, avoiding the use of emojis. So emojis are brilliant, right? So you use them on text, on social media, and they can convey so much meaning. But on email, in a professional setting, there's not really much space for an emoji. You know, you may get to know over time from when you're liaising with someone back and forth, someone might start signing off with a smiley face, in which case you might want to send that back. But generally, as a rule of thumb, I would avoid the use of emojis on email. And review before sending. So this kind of feeds into the point about kind of proofing your grammar and spelling, but always review the full email before you send, just in case last minute there's something you haven't spotted. If time allows, then I would advise saving it as a draft and then maybe coming back to it a little bit later on, just to have another final check before you send the email to make sure you're 100%, or get somebody else to look at it. You know, if there's a friend or a family member or somebody who has 5 minutes just to cast an eye over an email, especially if it's an important one, then that's definitely going to boost your confidence if you know somebody else has had a look at it as well. And the final point here on email etiquette is ensuring that you're replying promptly. So you're going back to people as quickly as possible. We all know, or I definitely know because I'm really impatient, that there's nothing worse than waiting for a reply, especially, you know, if you want an answer to your question quite quickly. So if you expect that of other people, then definitely it's polite, first and foremost, but good practice as well to reply to people as quickly as you possibly can. Now, I'm not saying to rush into a response, because sometimes you might need some time to think about something, but there's nothing to stop you sending them a kind of holding email in the meantime, which just says, look, thank you so much for the question, I'm looking into it, I'll get back to you as soon as possible, or I'm looking for the document you've requested, once I found it I'll send it across. And yeah, hopefully that'll set you in good stead for your email practice going forward. Okay, so next is online meetings and the things that you can do before you join a meeting to make sure you're putting yourself in the best possible position for that meeting to go well. So first things first is to accept the meeting invitation. So whoever's hosting a meeting with you, they'll send you an invitation in advance with a link to the meeting, which you can see in the bottom right-hand corner here on the slide. And it's always polite, of course, to let them know whether you're going to be there or not. So ideally, when it comes into your Outlook inbox, you will press accept to accept the invitation. That tells them that you're coming. But if for some reason you can't make the meeting, then definitely let the person know in advance. There is a decline button on an invitation, and it gives you the option as well to edit the response in a drop-down menu. So I definitely advise typing in your reasons there for why you can't make it. So perhaps you've got a doctor's appointment or a dentist's appointment, and always suggest an alternative time to them that could work for you as well. Next up is to download Zoom or Teams. So Zoom and Teams generally are the platforms which will be used for meetings, and it's always best to download these apps either to your phone or your laptop or whatever technology you're going to be using to give yourself the best possible experience with the platforms. It's much more stable as a connection, and create an account on both of those as well. So make sure you have a Zoom account, you have a Teams account before you join the meeting, because there's nothing worse if it's a couple of minutes before the meeting and you're rushing around trying to set up an account. That's going to take loads of time and having to verify your email. It'll be much easier if you've already set it all up, and obviously make note of your password as well so that you don't forget it. Fourth thing here would be to test the link for the meeting beforehand. Now I always do this. Normally the link works just fine, but it's always worth just checking, especially just after you've created your account, that it links through to your account properly, and that when you join the meeting it's your name which pops up on the side. So just make sure, and you can see in these screenshots here, you can click here to join the meeting. It's quite self-explanatory in that sense. It's quite user-friendly. So join Zoom meeting, click on that, and you'll be away. Next thing I would recommend, if you can, is to practice with a friend or a family member. Again, always worth doing. So if you go into your new Teams account or your new Zoom account, try setting up a link for yourself and send it to a friend and see if they manage to be able to join it. So that should give you a pretty good indication that your account has been set up properly. Testing your technology and Wi-Fi as well is always really important. So for example, if you're joining a meeting for the first time from your laptop, you want to make sure that your camera is working. You'll want to make sure that the volume is coming through properly and as it should. And testing the Wi-Fi as well is super important. So wherever it is that you're going to be doing your meeting, once you've decided where you're doing it from, make sure you test the Wi-Fi and that it's strong enough to host your meeting. So most Wi-Fis will be absolutely fine with hosting a Zoom or a Teams meeting, but there's nothing worse if you're trying to kind of listen to what somebody's got to say and you just can't hear them because it's breaking up or the image is blurry. So definitely test your Wi-Fi connection in advance. Create a dedicated workspace if you possibly can. So what I mean here is just making sure there's somewhere, whether it's in your house, whether it's in a library, community centre, college, wherever it might be, just somewhere where you can go, which is a quiet space for you to sit down and set up your laptop or your phone in a stable environment, so things aren't kind of shaking around, you're not having to hold your phone and wobbling it about. That's just going to make you look so much more professional if you're in a dedicated setting. You don't have to move around during your meeting, that you can be there throughout, and it'll make you feel much more relaxed as well if you have that dedicated space. Dress professionally is the next point. So obviously someone is only going to see from the shoulders up, so it's important that whatever you're wearing from there on up is appropriate and you deem it to be professional enough. But also this can put you in a really good mindset if you're wearing clothes that you might wear to a job interview, if it's a job interview, or to an in-person meeting. This is going to put you in that kind of professional headspace before you've started the meeting. And you might have a specific item of clothing which makes you feel super confident, so why not wear that item of clothing? It doesn't matter that nobody's going to see it, because you know that you'll be wearing it. And the final thing here is to be punctual. Now you don't want to keep people waiting, and the same means as an in-person meeting, you want to make sure that you're on time. So generally speaking, I would always set up my computer or my phone at least 5 or 10 minutes in advance. I think 10 minutes probably to be safe for an online meeting, just because that gives you a bit of a barrier and a bit of leeway if for whatever reason you need to re-sign into your account, or if the Wi-Fi is playing up, it gives you a good 10 minutes to play with. So I would always recommend allowing yourself a little bit of time in advance of the meeting. Okay, so now you're nearly done with all your prep for the online meeting. You're about to join, you've pressed the join link, and this little screen here, which I've screenshotted, pops up. Now, this is where you're going to kind of check the settings are all okay before you just join that meeting and start talking with the person you're having a meeting with. So definitely make sure your video is on where possible. It's only polite, you know, somebody doesn't want to be meeting with you and talking to a blank screen. And likewise, you probably wouldn't like that either. So definitely it allows for a real experience if you're able to see their face and they are able to see you. So you can see the little toggle there underneath my picture in this screenshot as to how to turn your camera on, but generally that will already be on when you join, so you probably won't have to do anything. Blurring your background is always a good idea, like I've done here in my little bubble, but also in that screenshot there, because, you know, if you have had to set up in a bedroom, perhaps, you know, you don't necessarily want this professional person seeing your bed in the background or your clothes or whatever the case may be. Also, you might be in a public space like a library, and people might be walking back and forth in the background, and you don't want them to be distracting from your meeting. And ensure your name is spelt correctly. So you just want to make sure before you've signed in that when you're setting up your Zoom account or your Teams account, that you've spelt your name right, because that's one of the first things they'll see. They'll see your picture, they'll see your name, and you just want to make sure, obviously, that your name's right to make that best first impression. Okay, so now you're finally in the meeting. I just want to share my top tips before we finish as to how to convey yourself best in that meeting, and the kind of general etiquette of online meetings. So the first one here is to hit mute when you're not speaking. So you can see in the screenshots here, there's a little picture of a microphone. If you press that once, it'll strike through, and that'll show you that you are on mute. And just the reason for doing this more than anything is politeness, because actually, you know, if you've got some background noise going on, you know, you might be in a public space, you don't want that to be distracting from the person that you're trying to listen to, and also kind of distracting others who might be in the meeting as well. If there are lots of people in the meeting, there might be lots of people trying to speak at once, and it all just gets a little bit messy. So always best to mute yourself if you're not speaking, and of course remember to unmute yourself if you do need to contribute or say anything. But that would be the general rule of thumb. If there are just two of you in a meeting and it's more chatty, maybe you won't feel the need to have to mute yourself. But particularly if there are bigger meetings, definitely I would consider doing that. Speaking clearly as well. Obviously you're relying on technology to relay your voice as opposed to being in a real room with someone, so do make sure you're projecting yourself as clearly as possible. Now there's a function on online meetings. You can see the little hand in the bottom left hand corner here, which says raise underneath it. Now if you want to ask a question, I would always recommend that you press the raise button, especially in those meetings where there are lots of people, because that will ping up a notification to the host to let them know that you have a question. And also, you know, it means that people aren't all jumping in over each other trying to ask and fight for their question to be answered. So it's always polite to raise hand in that virtual setting. Use the chat as well to interact with others. So again, along the toolbar here, you'll see the chat function. If you click on that, it'll pop up a chat with all other members of the group. Quite often people will use this to ask a question and, you know, how is everyone feeling today? And you all might kind of input your answers in there. It works in exactly the same way as a kind of messenger chat or a WhatsApp chat. And yeah, it just allows you to have some interaction, although you're doing it virtually with the other people on the call. Handy as well if you want to share a link with someone, maybe to a website or something. Only leave the chat once the host ends the meeting. So this is really important. You know, you wouldn't walk out of a room before somebody has finished the meeting. So in the same way, definitely always wait until the host says that the meeting is over before you press leave. And finally, there are some additional features. So I would recommend factoring some time to kind of play around with these features. But you can see I've screenshotted one in the top screenshot here. If you press on more, the three dots there, and go down to language and speaking speech, you can actually turn on live captions. So what this means is it's essentially going to give you subtitles for the person who's speaking. So if you are in a busy place and you're having difficulty hearing someone, you might want to turn those subtitles on so that you can better see what's being said. So there are lots of really handy little additional features, so do factor in time to investigate those a little bit further. And that's it from my Digital Futures Festival talk. So thank you so much for joining. I really hope you've learned something today and that you feel much more confident in presenting yourself online as a result. And as I mentioned at the start, I'd really encourage you to register with Employability Bridgend for more support on your journey to finding a future career. Good luck.